Hello, and welcome to The Drowsy Professor. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight, ready to journey back through time to explore one of archaeology's most fascinating and gentle mysteries. As you settle in, let me know where in the world and at what time you're watching. Are you tucked under blankets in a cozy bedroom, perhaps listening from a quiet corner of your home as the day winds down? Now, get comfortable. Adjust your pillows, pull that blanket a little closer, and take a slow, deep breath. Tonight, we're going to wander together through the peaceful transformation of one of humanity's most remarkable civilizations, the Maya, and discover how sometimes the most profound changes happen not with dramatic collapse, but with the gentle, patient rhythm of adaptation and renewal. Take another breath, let your shoulders relax, and let's begin our quiet journey into the mystery. Imagine, if you will, that you're standing in the soft, golden light of early morning somewhere around the year 800 CE in what we now call the Petén region of Guatemala. The air is warm and humid, carrying with it the rich, earthy scent of tropical forest and the distant sound of howler monkeys greeting the dawn. You're positioned on a small hill, perhaps where an ancient Maya astronomer once stood to observe the movements of Venus. And spread before you is a sight that would take your breath away, a vast landscape dotted with gleaming white pyramids, their limestone surfaces catching the first rays of sunlight like scattered jewels across an emerald carpet of jungle. This is the Maya world at its absolute peak, a civilization so sophisticated and vibrant that it supported millions of people across an area larger than modern-day Germany. The cities you see stretching to the horizon, Tikal, Calakmul, Karakol, Naranjo, are not the silent ruins that modern visitors know, but living, breathing communities filled with the gentle hum of daily life. Smoke rises lazily from countless cooking fires, creating a soft haze that catches the morning light. The sounds that drift to you on the warm breeze are peaceful and familiar. Children's laughter echoing from courtyards, the rhythmic scraping of corn being ground in a masa, the soft splash of water being drawn from cenotes, and the occasional call of a merchant announcing his wares. The architecture that surrounds you represents the culmination of over 1,000 years of accumulated knowledge and artistic achievement. These are not crude stone piles, but sophisticated urban centers designed with an understanding of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering that rivals any civilization of its time. The pyramids that dominate each city skyline are precisely aligned to track the movements of celestial bodies, their stepped sides creating a visual rhythm that speaks to the Maya understanding of cosmic cycles and the passage of time. Let your imagination drift closer to one of these magnificent cities, perhaps to Tikal, where the Temple of the Grand Jaguar rises nearly 150 feet above the forest floor. As you approach, you notice how the city seems to grow organically from the landscape itself, with causeways and plazas connected by paths that follow the natural contours of the land. The Maya haven't conquered their environment so much as they've learned to live in harmony with it, creating urban spaces that feel like extensions of the forest rather than impositions upon it. The population density here is remarkable, yet it doesn't feel crowded or overwhelming. Estimates suggest that at its peak, the area around Tikal supported perhaps 100,000 people, while the broader Maya region was home to between 8 and 15 million inhabitants. These numbers represent one of the most successful examples of sustainable urban development in the pre-industrial world, a civilization that had learned to support large populations while maintaining the delicate balance necessary for long-term survival in a tropical environment. As you wander through the city in your imagination, you begin to appreciate the incredible sophistication of Maya society. This is a civilization with a complete writing system, the only one developed in the pre-Columbian Americas, capable of recording everything from historical events to astronomical observations to poetry. The glyphs carved into stone monuments tell stories of kings and queens, of victories and alliances, of ritual ceremonies and cosmic events. These aren't simple picture writings, but a complex system of symbols that can represent sounds, concepts, and complete ideas with remarkable precision and elegance. The mathematical achievements of the Maya, are equally impressive. They developed the concept of zero independently, centuries before it appeared in Europe. Their calendar system was more accurate than the Julian calendar used in medieval Europe, and their astronomical observations were precise enough to predict eclipses and track the movements of planets with remarkable accuracy. The Venus cycle, in particular, held special significance for the Maya, who tracked its 584-day cycle with such precision that their calculations differ from modern astronomical measurements by only a few hours over centuries of observation. The daily life unfolding around you in this ancient city reflects a society that has achieved remarkable stability and prosperity. The Maya have developed sophisticated agricultural techniques that allow them to support their large population while maintaining soil fertility. They've created raised fields and swampy areas, terraced hillsides to prevent erosion, and developed complex water management systems that collect and store rainwater for use during dry periods. Their understanding of forest ecology is so sophisticated that they practice a form of agroforestry that actually increases biodiversity while providing food, building materials, and other resources. The social organization of Maya society is complex but not rigid. While there are clear hierarchies, with kings, nobles, priests, and commoners occupying different levels of society, there's also remarkable social mobility and specialization. Master craftspeople, whether they work in jade, obsidian, or feathers, are held in high regard. Scribes who can read and write the complex glyph system are essential to the functioning of government and religion. Astronomers and mathematicians help maintain the calendar systems that govern both religious ceremonies and agricultural activities. The trade networks that connect these Maya cities extend across thousands of miles, reaching from the highlands of Guatemala to the coastal plains of the Gulf of Mexico, and from the Yucatan Peninsula to the Pacific coast of Chiapas. Jade from the Motagua Valley, obsidian from the volcanic highlands, salt from coastal lagoons, and cacao from the river valleys all flow along these trade routes, creating a complex web of economic relationships that bind the Maya world together. The merchants who travel these routes are often also diplomats and news bearers, carrying information about political events, astronomical observations, and cultural innovations from city to city. The religious and ceremonial life of the Maya is deeply integrated into their daily existence. The cosmos, as they understand it, is a living entity with which humans must maintain proper relationships through ritual and ceremony. The ball game, played in specially constructed courts, is not merely entertainment, but a sacred reenactment of cosmic conflicts. The bloodletting rituals performed by rulers are not acts of violence, but sacred offerings that maintain the flow of life force between the human and divine worlds. The elaborate calendar systems don't just track time, but reveal the sacred patterns that govern all existence. The artistic achievements of the Maya reach their peak during this period. The wall paintings at Bonampak, the carved lintels at Yaxchilan, the stele at Copan, all represent a flowering of artistic expression that combines technical mastery with deep spiritual meaning. Maya artists work in media ranging from massive stone sculptures to delicate ceramic vessels painted with mythological scenes. Their understanding of proportion, perspective, and narrative composition rivals that of any artistic tradition in the world. The architectural innovations of this period demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of engineering and acoustics. The Great Ball Court at Chichen Itza is designed so that a whisper at one end can be heard clearly at the other, nearly 500 feet away. The pyramids are not solid stone, but contain complex internal chambers and passages that serve both practical and ritual purposes. The corbelled arch, while not as efficient as the true arch, allows Maya architect to create soaring interior spaces that enhance the spiritual impact of their temples. The ecological knowledge possessed by the Maya is perhaps most impressive of all. They've learned to read the forest like a book, understanding which plants provide food, medicine, building materials, and spiritual power. They know when to burn sections of forest to create fertile fields, when to let land lie fallow to restore its fertility, and how to manage water resources to ensure year-round supplies. Their understanding of weather patterns allows them to predict the onset of rainy seasons with remarkable accuracy, crucial knowledge for agricultural planning in a region where rainfall can vary dramatically from year to year. The educational systems that transmit this knowledge from generation to generation are sophisticated and comprehensive. Children learn not just practical skills, but also the complex mythological and astronomical knowledge that underlies Maya civilization. The training of scribes, priests, and rulers involves years of intensive study in mathematics, astronomy, history, and theology. The oral traditions that supplement written records ensure that crucial knowledge is preserved and transmitted even when written documents are lost or destroyed. As you stand in this magnificent city at the height of Maya civilization, surrounded by the evidence of human achievement and cultural sophistication, it's difficult to imagine that this remarkable society is approaching a period of profound transformation. The signs of change are not yet visible in the bustling streets and busy marketplaces. The pyramids still gleam white in the morning sun. The ceremonies still follow their ancient patterns, and the trade routes still bring exotic goods from distant lands. Yet if you knew where to look, if you possessed the knowledge of modern archaeologists and climatologists, you might notice subtle signs that change is coming. Perhaps the water levels in the cenotes are slightly lower than they were a generation ago. Maybe the rains have been arriving a few days later each year, or ending a little earlier. The forest around the cities might be showing signs of stress, with some species becoming less common while others expand their ranges. These changes are so gradual, so subtle, that they're easily overlooked or attributed to normal variation. But they represent the beginning of a transformation that will reshape the entire Maya world. The remarkable thing about this civilization is not that it eventually faced challenges, but that it had already demonstrated such extraordinary resilience and adaptability. The Maya had survived droughts before, had adapted to changing political circumstances, had rebuilt cities after military defeats. Their sophisticated understanding of their environment, their flexible social organization, and their rich cultural traditions had allowed them to thrive for over 1,000 years in one of the world's most challenging environments. The cities spread before you in the golden morning light represent more than just architectural achievements or political centers. They embody a way of understanding the world that recognizes the interconnectedness of all things, human and natural, earthly and cosmic, temporal and eternal. The Maya worldview sees time not as a linear progression, but as a series of cycles, each ending leading to a new beginning, each transformation containing within it the seeds of renewal. As the sun climbs higher in the sky and the morning mist begins to lift from the forest canopy, you can sense the gentle rhythm of daily life beginning to accelerate. Markets are opening, children are heading to their lessons, craftspeople are taking up their tools, and farmers are setting out for their fields. This is a civilization at the height of its confidence and creativity, secure in its knowledge of how to live successfully in its chosen environment, confident in its ability to adapt to whatever challenges the future might bring. The mystery we're about to explore together is not really about collapse in the dramatic sense. Cities abandoned overnight, populations fleeing in panic, civilizations vanishing without a trace. Instead, it's about transformation, adaptation, and the patient wisdom of a people who understood that all things must change, and that the ending of one cycle is always the beginning of another. The Maya who built these magnificent cities were not naive about the challenges of their environment or the fragility of their achievements. They were people who understood that survival required constant attention, careful planning, and the wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. The story we're about to unfold is ultimately one of human resilience and adaptation, of a civilization that faced unprecedented challenges with dignity and wisdom, and that found ways to preserve what was most valuable while releasing what could no longer be sustained. It's a story that speaks to our own time, when we too face environmental and social challenges that require us to balance preservation with transformation, holding on to what we value most while adapting to changing circumstances. As we prepare to follow this gentle mystery through the centuries, Let yourself settle more deeply into comfort and relaxation. The story ahead is one of patience and wisdom, of gradual change and thoughtful adaptation. There are no sudden disasters to startle you, no violent upheavals to disturb your peace. Instead, there are the slow rhythms of climate and culture, the patient processes of human adaptation, and the quiet wisdom of a people who understood that sometimes the most profound transformations happen not with dramatic gestures, but with the gentle, persistent flow of time itself. Now, let's allow time to flow forward like a gentle river, carrying us deeper into the 9th century, when the first whispers of change began to drift across the Maya world like morning mist through the forest canopy. Picture yourself as one of the Maya astronomers who spent their nights tracking the movements of celestial bodies from the tops of pyramids, or perhaps as a farmer who had learned to read the subtle signs in wind and cloud that forecast the coming of the rains. You're intimately familiar with the rhythms of your world, the way the seasons flow one into another, the patterns of wet and dry that have governed life in the Maya lowlands for generations beyond memory. At first, the changes are so subtle that they seem to fall within the normal range of variation that any observant person expects to see from year to year. Weather, after all, is never perfectly consistent. Some years the rains come early, others late. Some seasons bring abundance, others require careful management of stored resources. Your ancestors have always known this, have built their sophisticated water management systems and agricultural practices around this natural variability. The great reservoirs beneath the cities, the terrace fields that capture every precious drop of water, the complex calendar systems that help predict the best times for planting and harvesting. All of these represent centuries of accumulated wisdom about living successfully in a land where water is both abundant and scarce, depending on the whims of the sky. But now, if you're paying very careful attention, you might notice that the whispers are beginning to tell a slightly different story. The rains that usually arrive in May are coming a few days later than they did when your grandfather was young. The dry season, which traditionally ended with the dramatic arrival of the first thunderstorms, seems to be extending itself just a little bit longer each year. These changes are measured in days, sometimes just hours, but they accumulate across seasons and years like the slow deposit of sediment in a quiet pool. The cenotes, those magical openings in the limestone bedrock that provide access to the underground rivers running beneath the Maya world, are showing subtle signs of this shift. If you've been drawing water from the same cenote for decades, as many Maya families have, you might notice that you have to lower your gourd a few inches further to reach the water surface. The change is gradual enough that it could easily be attributed to seasonal variation, but year after year, the pattern becomes more apparent. The sacred pools that once brimmed close to ground level now require just a bit more effort to access their life-giving waters. Let your imagination drift to the court of one of the great Maya kings, perhaps at Tikal or Calakmul, where the royal astronomers and scribes are beginning to notice anomalies in their careful records. These are not dramatic departures from normal patterns, but subtle shifts that only become apparent when viewed across the span of decades. The Venus cycles that have been tracked with such precision for generations continue their eternal dance, but the weather patterns that have traditionally aligned with certain astronomical events seem to be drifting slightly out of phase. The Maya understanding of time operates on multiple scales simultaneously, from the daily rhythm of sunrise and sunset to the great cycles that span thousands of years. Their calendar systems track these various temporal rhythms with remarkable precision, and it's through these sophisticated record-keeping practices that the subtle changes in climate first become apparent to their scholars and rulers. The long count calendar, which measures time from the mythical creation date of the current world age, provides a framework for understanding events across centuries and millennia. But it's the more immediate cycles, the 260-day sacred calendar that governs ritual activities, and the 365-day solar year that tracks agricultural seasons, that first register the whispered messages of climatic change. The farmers who work the terraced fields around the great cities are among the first to sense these subtle shifts, though they might not yet recognize them as part of a larger pattern. These are people whose livelihoods depend on reading the subtle signs that nature provides: the behavior of birds, the feel of the wind, the quality of light in the early morning sky. They know that certain trees flower when the rains are about to begin, that particular insects emerge when soil moisture reaches optimal levels for planting, that the calls of specific birds signal changes in atmospheric pressure that precede weather shifts. Now, these natural indicators are beginning to tell a slightly different story. The trees that traditionally flowered 2 weeks before the rains are blooming 3 weeks early, but the rains themselves are arriving later than expected. The birds that usually signal the end of the dry season are changing their migration patterns slightly, arriving at different times or choosing different nesting areas. These changes are subtle enough that they could be attributed to normal variation, but attentive observers begin to notice patterns emerging across multiple seasons. The ecological knowledge possessed by the Maya includes a deep understanding of the forest communities that surround their cities. They know which plants thrive in different moisture conditions, which animals prefer specific microclimates, and how the complex web of relationships between species responds to environmental changes. Now, some of these relationships are beginning to shift in ways that suggest underlying changes in the environment itself. Certain species of trees that prefer moist conditions are becoming less common in areas where they once thrived, while other species that tolerate drier conditions are expanding their ranges. The changes happen so gradually that they're barely perceptible from year to year. But over the span of a human lifetime, the composition of the forest is beginning to shift in subtle but significant ways. The Maya, with their sophisticated ecological knowledge, are among the first to notice these patterns and to understand their potential implications. The water management systems that represent some of the Maya's greatest engineering achievements are also beginning to register these subtle environmental changes. The great reservoirs that collect rainwater during the wet season and store it for use during dry periods are experiencing slightly different patterns of inflow and evaporation. The channels and aguadas that direct water flow are having to be adjusted more frequently to maintain optimal water levels. These adjustments are within the normal range of maintenance that such systems require, but their frequency suggests that the underlying conditions are shifting. The agricultural practices that support the large Maya populations are incredibly sophisticated, involving complex rotations of crops, careful management of soil fertility, and precise timing of planting and harvesting activities. The Maya have developed varieties of corn, beans, and squash that are specifically adapted to local conditions, and their farming techniques include methods for maintaining soil moisture and preventing erosion that represent centuries of accumulated experience. Now, some of these time-tested practices are requiring minor adjustments as the timing of rainfall patterns shifts slightly from traditional norms. The honey production that provides both sweetener and trade goods for the Maya begins to show subtle changes as the flowering patterns of forest plants shift in response to changing moisture conditions. The Maya are skilled beekeepers who understand the complex relationships between different plant species and the seasonal availability of nectar sources. When these relationships begin to change, even slightly, it affects both honey production and the broader ecological balance that the Maya have learned to manage so skillfully. The trade networks that connect Maya cities across thousands of miles of forest and coastline are sensitive to even small changes in resource availability and transportation conditions. The rivers that serve as major transportation arteries show subtle changes in water levels that affect the ease of canoe travel. The forest paths that connect inland cities experience minor changes in condition as vegetation patterns shift slightly in response to altered moisture regimes. These changes don't disrupt trade, but they require small adjustments in travel planning and resource allocation. The ceramic workshops that produce the beautiful pottery for which the Maya are famous begin to notice subtle changes in the clay deposits they've used for generations. Clay quality is affected by the moisture conditions under which it forms, and slight changes in seasonal precipitation patterns can alter the characteristics of clay deposits over time. Master potters, whose skills have been refined through decades of experience, notice these subtle changes in the materials they work with and adjust their techniques accordingly. The construction activities that continue to expand and embellish Maya cities require careful attention to weather patterns, as certain types of work can only be undertaken during specific seasons. The quarrying of limestone blocks, the mixing of mortar, and the application of stucco finishes all depend on appropriate moisture conditions. As weather patterns shift slightly, construction schedules require minor adjustments to ensure that work proceeds under optimal conditions. The ritual calendar that governs Maya's ceremonial life is intimately connected to astronomical and agricultural cycles. Many ceremonies are timed to coincide with specific seasonal events: the first rains, the corn harvest, the movements of particular celestial bodies. As these natural patterns shift subtly, the timing of ceremonies requires careful recalibration to maintain their effectiveness and meaning. The Maya priests and astronomers who oversee these activities are skilled at making such adjustments, but the need for more frequent recalibration suggests that underlying patterns are changing. The oral traditions that preserve Maya knowledge include detailed information about weather patterns, ecological relationships, and agricultural techniques that have been refined over generations. These traditions now begin to incorporate new observations about changing conditions, as elders notice that some of the old predictive methods are becoming less reliable and require modification. The flexibility of oral tradition allows for these adjustments to be made smoothly, but their necessity indicates that fundamental patterns are shifting. The architectural modifications being made to existing buildings begin to reflect subtle changes in environmental conditions. Water collection systems are being enhanced to capture and store larger volumes of rainwater. Drainage systems around buildings are being improved to handle changing patterns of stormwater runoff. These modifications represent the practical wisdom of a people who understand that adaptation to changing conditions is a normal part of long-term survival. But their increasing frequency suggests that the pace of change is accelerating slightly. The diplomatic relationships between Maya cities are partly based on mutual assistance during times of environmental stress, such as periods of drought or flooding. The frequency of such assistance requests is beginning to increase slightly as different regions experience changing patterns of resource availability. These changes don't represent crisis conditions, but they do indicate that the environmental variability that Maya political systems are designed to handle is beginning to increase beyond traditional norms. The artistic expressions found in Maya pottery, wall paintings, and stone carvings begin to show subtle shifts in the themes and symbols used to represent natural phenomena. Artists who are sensitive to environmental changes incorporate new observations about weather patterns, plant and animal behavior, and seasonal cycles into their work. These artistic innovations provide a window into the changing relationship between the Maya and their environment, documented in the visual language that complements their written records. The medicinal practices of Maya healers depend on detailed knowledge of plant properties and seasonal availability of medicinal materials. As ecological patterns shift subtly, healers must adjust their collection schedules and sometimes substitute different plants for traditional remedies. The flexibility of Maya medical knowledge allows for these adaptations, but their necessity reflects the gradual changes occurring in the natural world around them. The educational systems that transmit knowledge from one generation to the next begin to emphasize the importance of careful observation and adaptive thinking. Young people are taught not just traditional knowledge, but also the skills needed to recognize and respond to changing conditions. This emphasis on adaptability reflects the growing recognition that environmental conditions may not remain as stable as they have been in the past. As the decades pass through the 9th century, these whispered messages of change begin to accumulate into a pattern that thoughtful observers can no longer attribute entirely to normal variation. The changes remain subtle, manageable through the sophisticated adaptive systems that Maya civilization has developed over centuries, but they represent the beginning of a transformation that will eventually reshape the entire Maya world. Yet it's important to understand that these changes don't represent a crisis or catastrophe in the making. Instead, they reflect the kind of environmental variability that human societies have always faced and to which the Maya are particularly well adapted through their sophisticated understanding of their environment and their flexible social and political systems. The whispers of change are concerning primarily because they represent a departure from the patterns that have been stable for so long, not because they pose immediate threats to Maya survival. The remarkable thing about Maya society during this period is not that it faces environmental challenges. All human societies face such challenges, but that it possesses such sophisticated mechanisms for detecting, understanding, and responding to these challenges. The observations being made by Maya astronomers, farmers, and scholars represent some of the most detailed and accurate environmental monitoring undertaken by any pre-industrial society. Their responses demonstrate a level of environmental wisdom and adaptive capacity that would be impressive in any historical context. As you drift through this gentle mystery with us, imagine yourself as one of these careful observers, noting the subtle signs and adjusting ancient practices with the wisdom that comes from deep understanding of natural patterns. The rains may be whispering slightly different messages than they did in your grandparents' time, but you possess the knowledge and skills needed to listen carefully to what they're saying and to respond appropriately to their counsel. This is not a story of impending doom, but of the patient intelligence with which human beings have always approached the challenge of living successfully in a world where change is the only constant. As we allow time to continue its patient flow into the middle decades of the 9th century, you might find yourself standing in one of the great plazas of a Maya city, perhaps at Copan or Caracol, watching a scene that would seem utterly normal to a casual observer, but carries deeper significance for those who understand the subtle rhythms of Maya civilization. The morning sun still illuminates the white limestone surfaces of ancient pyramids. Merchants still call out their wares from market stalls, and children still play in the courtyards between residential compounds. Yet if you possess the perspective of someone who has watched this civilization for decades, you might begin to notice that certain activities that once defined the heartbeat of Maya urban life are gradually becoming less frequent, like a melody slowly fading to a gentler volume. The massive construction projects that have characterized Maya cities for centuries, the building of new pyramids, the expansion of palace complexes, the creation of elaborate tomb chambers for rulers, are beginning to require different kinds of planning and resource allocation than they did in previous generations. It's not that construction has stopped, but rather that the scope and frequency of these projects are being reconsidered in light of changing circumstances. Master architects and engineers, whose knowledge represents generations of accumulated expertise, are finding themselves focusing more on maintenance and modification of existing structures rather than the creation of entirely new monumental buildings. Picture yourself as one of these master builders, someone whose family has served Maya rulers for generations, whose knowledge of quarrying limestone, mixing mortar, and calculating the precise angles needed for corbelled arches represents a lifetime of dedicated study. You've noticed that the discussions in royal councils now include more consideration of resource allocation, more careful weighing of the costs and benefits of major construction projects. This isn't because resources have become scarce, but because the subtle environmental changes you've been observing suggest that a more conservative approach to resource management might be wise. The quarries that have supplied building stone for Maya cities are showing subtle signs of the changing environmental conditions. The limestone that forms the geological foundation of the Maya lowlands is deposited over millions of years by ancient seas, and its quality can be affected by groundwater levels and seasonal moisture patterns. Master quarrymen, whose skills include the ability to read stone like a book, are noticing that certain quarry sites are producing stone with slightly different characteristics than in the past. These changes don't prevent construction, but they require adjustments in technique and perhaps the use of different quarry sites that maintain optimal conditions. The transportation of massive stone blocks from quarries to construction sites depends on seasonal patterns of rainfall and river levels. The wooden rollers, ropes, and levers used to move multi-ton stones require careful timing to take advantage of optimal weather conditions. As seasonal patterns shift subtly, construction schedules require more flexible planning to ensure that materials can be moved efficiently and safely. This increased need for flexibility naturally leads to more conservative project planning, with construction timelines extended to accommodate less predictable weather patterns. The workforce organization for major construction projects involves coordinating the activities of hundreds or sometimes thousands of people: stone cutters, mortar mixers, rope makers, food preparers, and countless others whose specialized skills contribute to these massive undertakings. As agricultural patterns require minor adjustments in response to changing rainfall patterns, the seasonal availability of labor for construction projects becomes less predictable. Farmers who traditionally worked on construction projects during agricultural off-seasons now need to pay more attention to extended crop tending activities or water management tasks. The artistic workshops that create the elaborate sculptures, frescoes, and decorative elements that adorn Maya buildings are experiencing their own subtle adaptations to changing conditions. The pigments used for painting come from a variety of sources: minerals from distant mountains, plants from specific forest environments, and clays from particular deposits. As ecological patterns shift gradually, some of these materials become less readily available, requiring artists to experiment with alternative sources or to modify their techniques to achieve similar effects with different materials. The ceremonial aspects of construction projects, the rituals performed at groundbreaking, the offerings placed in building foundations, the celebrations that mark completion of major structures, are being adjusted to account for changing seasonal patterns. Many of these ceremonies are timed to coincide with specific astronomical events or seasonal transitions, and as these natural patterns shift slightly, ceremonial schedules require careful recalibration. Maya priests and astronomers are skilled at making such adjustments, but the increasing frequency with which they're needed suggests that underlying patterns are continuing to evolve. The economic calculations that support major construction projects involve complex considerations of resource availability, labor costs, and long-term benefits to the community. Maya rulers and their advisors are finding that these calculations now require more conservative assumptions about future resource availability and more careful attention to maintaining reserves for unexpected challenges. This doesn't represent a crisis in Maya economic thinking, but rather a mature response to changing conditions that demonstrates the sophistication of Maya planning and resource management. The tribute systems that support royal construction projects are being subtly modified as outlying communities experience minor changes in their agricultural productivity and resource availability. Tribute obligations that were established based on traditional patterns of local production are being adjusted to reflect new realities, often with tribute payments being diversified to include a wider range of goods or services. These modifications maintain the tributary relationships that bind Maya political systems together while accommodating changing local conditions. The architectural innovations that emerge during this period reflect the wisdom of builders who understand that adaptation is a sign of strength rather than weakness. New construction techniques are being developed that require fewer materials while maintaining structural integrity. Water collection and storage systems are being incorporated into building designs more systematically. Ventilation systems are being improved to provide better climate control in residential and ceremonial structures. These innovations represent the continuing evolution of Maya architectural knowledge rather than responses to crisis conditions. The urban planning decisions being made in Maya cities increasingly emphasize sustainability and resource efficiency. New residential areas are being designed with improved water collection systems and more efficient use of available space. Market areas are being reorganized to improve the flow of goods and people while reducing the infrastructure required to support commercial activities. Public spaces are being modified to provide better drainage during seasonal rains while maintaining their ceremonial and social functions. The diplomatic relationships between Maya cities are beginning to include more formal agreements about mutual assistance during periods of environmental stress. Treaties that once focused primarily on trade relationships and military alliances now include provisions for sharing resources during droughts or other challenging conditions. These agreements represent the extension of traditional Maya practices of reciprocity and mutual aid to address the subtle changes in environmental conditions that are affecting all Maya communities. The craft production activities that support both local consumption and long-distance trade are being adjusted to account for changing patterns of resource availability. Pottery workshops are experimenting with new clay sources and firing techniques. Textile producers are exploring alternative fiber sources and dye materials. Stone tool makers are adjusting their techniques to work with materials from different quarry sites. These adaptations maintain the quality and variety of Maya craft production while accommodating changing environmental conditions. The agricultural terracing and water management systems that support Maya farming are receiving increased attention and investment. Rather than focusing resources on new monumental construction, many communities are choosing to improve and expand their agricultural infrastructure. New terraces are being built to capture and retain rainwater more effectively. Existing canal systems are being upgraded to handle changing patterns of seasonal water flow. These investments represent a shift in priorities that emphasizes long-term sustainability over monumental display. The forest management practices that provide building materials, fuel, and numerous other resources are being refined to account for subtle changes in forest composition and growth patterns. Maya foresters, whose knowledge represents centuries of accumulated experience, are adjusting their harvesting schedules and techniques to maintain forest health under changing conditions. These adaptations ensure the continued availability of forest resources while maintaining the ecological balance that supports Maya civilization. The storage systems that preserve food, materials, and other resources for use during lean periods are being expanded and improved. Underground storage chambers are being enlarged and better designed to maintain optimal temperature and humidity conditions. Food preservation techniques are being refined to extend storage life under changing climatic conditions. These improvements represent prudent responses to increasing environmental variability rather than crisis preparations. The educational systems that transmit knowledge from one generation to the next are placing increased emphasis on adaptability and problem-solving skills. Young people are being taught not just traditional techniques, but also the principles underlying these techniques so they can modify and adapt them as conditions change. This emphasis on understanding principles rather than just following procedures represents a sophisticated approach to maintaining cultural continuity while allowing for necessary adaptations. The religious and philosophical frameworks that guide Maya decision-making are proving remarkably well-suited to this period of gradual change. Maya concepts of cyclical time, the importance of balance and reciprocity, and a need for humans to maintain proper relationships with natural forces provide guidance for navigating changing conditions with wisdom and dignity. The ceremonies and rituals that mark important transitions are being adapted to acknowledge changing seasonal patterns while maintaining their essential spiritual and social functions. The record-keeping systems that preserve knowledge about construction techniques, resource management, and environmental patterns are being expanded to document the changes being observed and the adaptations being made. Maya scribes are creating detailed accounts of new techniques and modified procedures, ensuring that future generations will have access to the knowledge being developed during this period of transition. These records represent an investment in future adaptability rather than simply documentation of current practices. The trade relationships that connect Maya cities to distant regions are being adjusted to account for changing patterns of resource availability and transportation conditions. Trade routes that depended on specific seasonal patterns of river navigation are being supplemented with alternative pathways. Trade goods are being diversified to reduce dependence on resources that are becoming less reliable. These modifications maintain the commercial networks that support Maya civilization while increasing their resilience to changing conditions. As you imagine yourself witnessing these gradual changes, you begin to appreciate that what you're observing is not a civilization in decline, but rather a mature society making thoughtful adaptations to changing circumstances. The slight reduction in monumental construction doesn't represent economic crisis, but rather a wise reallocation of resources towards sustainability and resilience. The increased attention to agricultural infrastructure and water management represents the kind of long-term thinking that has always characterized successful civilizations. The Maya understanding of time and change provides a philosophical framework that makes these adaptations feel natural rather than traumatic. The concept of cyclical time suggests that periods of expansion and consolidation are both normal parts of larger patterns. The emphasis on balance and reciprocity encourages responses that maintain harmony between human needs and environmental conditions. The recognition that all things change provides acceptance of the need for adaptation while maintaining confidence in the continuity of essential cultural values. The remarkable thing about this period in Maya history is not that environmental challenges are requiring adaptations. All successful civilizations face such challenges, but that Maya society possesses such sophisticated mechanisms for making these adaptations smoothly and wisely. The gradual shift from expansion to consolidation, from monumental construction to infrastructure improvement, from resource exploitation to sustainable management, represents exactly the kind of mature response that demonstrates the strength and wisdom of Maya civilization. As you settle more deeply into the comfort of your evening rest, let yourself appreciate the patience and wisdom with which the Maya approached this period of gentle transition. Their responses demonstrate that great civilizations are defined not by their ability to maintain unchanging expansion, but by their capacity to adapt thoughtfully to changing circumstances while preserving what is most valuable in their cultural heritage. The gentle retreat from stone represents not defeat, but wisdom. The understanding that sometimes the most profound strength is found in knowing when to consolidate rather than expand, when to preserve rather than create new, when to adapt rather than resist the patient counsels of a changing world. Let time carry you forward now, like a gentle current, into the later decades of the 9th century, when the whispered messages of environmental change have grown into a more persistent conversation between the Maya and their beloved landscape. Picture yourself walking along one of the ancient paths that connect Maya cities, perhaps the white road that links Coba to other centers across the Yucatan, and notice how your relationship with water, that most precious of all resources in the Maya world, has become more intimate, more carefully considered, more central to every decision made by families and communities throughout the lowlands. The cenotes that have served as windows into the underground river system flowing beneath Maya territory are telling clearer stories now about the gradual changes occurring in their watery realm. If you're someone whose family has drawn water from the same cenote for generations, you've developed an intimate knowledge of its moods and rhythms. How high the water rises during the wettest months, how low it falls during the driest periods, the way sunlight penetrates its depths at different times of day, the subtle changes in color and clarity that indicate optimal times for collection. Now, these familiar patterns are shifting with the patient persistence of geological time compressed into human observation. The water level that once rose to within arm's reach of the cenote's edge during peak rainy season now requires a longer rope and more careful maneuvering to access. The dry season, which traditionally lasted from November through April, seems to be extending its reach a few days further into what were once the early weeks of the wet season. These changes unfold so gradually that they could easily be attributed to normal variation, but their consistency across seasons and years has created a new kind of awareness about the precious nature of water resources. Imagine yourself as one of the water carriers whose daily journey to the cenote has become a meditation on scarcity and abundance. The pottery vessels you balance so carefully on your head or carry suspended from wooden frames represent not just containers for water, but repositories for the accumulated wisdom of your people about living successfully in a land where water availability can mean the difference between prosperity and struggle. The routes you follow to and from water sources have been worn smooth by countless generations of feet, and along these paths, your ancestors have developed a rich vocabulary for describing different types of rain, various qualities of stored water, and the subtle signs that indicate when water sources are stressed or thriving. The great reservoirs that represent some of the Maya's most impressive engineering achievements are requiring more sophisticated management strategies as the patterns of inflow and storage change gradually over time. These massive artificial lakes, carved from bedrock and lined with limestone plaster, were designed to capture and store rainwater during abundant periods for use during times of scarcity. The mathematical precision required to calculate optimal reservoir size, the engineering knowledge needed to create effective sealing systems, and the hydraulic understanding necessary to design efficient distribution networks represent centuries of accumulated expertise in water management. Now, the reservoir keepers, those specialists whose knowledge includes intimate understanding of evaporation rates, seasonal inflow patterns, and optimal distribution strategies, are finding that their traditional calculations require subtle but consistent adjustments. The rainy season, which once could be counted on to fill reservoirs to capacity, now requires more careful monitoring and more conservative distribution planning to ensure adequate supplies throughout extended dry periods. Let your imagination follow the network of channels and canals that distribute water from reservoirs and cenotes to residential areas, agricultural fields, and ceremonial centers throughout Maya cities. These waterways represent one of the most sophisticated hydraulic engineering systems developed by any pre-industrial civilization, involving precise calculations of gradient, flow rate, and pressure distribution. The Maya engineers who designed these systems understood principles of fluid dynamics that wouldn't be formally documented by European scientists for centuries to come. The maintenance of these water distribution systems has always required careful attention, but now it demands even more sophisticated planning and resource allocation. Channels that once carried adequate water flow throughout the year now require more frequent cleaning and occasional modification to maintain optimal distribution. Sediment management, which was always an important part of system maintenance, becomes more critical as reduced water flow decreases the natural flushing action that keeps channels clear. The agricultural systems that depend on carefully managed water resources are demonstrating the remarkable adaptability that has allowed Maya civilization to thrive in a challenging environment for over 1,000 years. The raised fields that transform swampy areas into productive agricultural land are being modified to capture and retain water more effectively. The terraced hillsides that prevent soil erosion while maximizing water retention are being expanded and improved to handle changing patterns of rainfall distribution. Picture yourself working alongside Maya farmers who are adjusting planting schedules and crop selection to accommodate the subtle but persistent changes in water availability. These are people whose knowledge of agricultural techniques represents generations of accumulated experience with managing crops in a tropical environment where both drought and flooding pose constant challenges. They understand which varieties of corn, beans, and squash perform best under different moisture conditions, how to modify planting techniques to maximize water retention, and when to implement water-saving measures that can extend growing seasons under challenging conditions. The forest gardens that supplement agricultural production with fruits, nuts, medicinal plants, and other forest products are being managed more intensively to ensure continued productivity under changing environmental conditions. Maya agroforestry techniques, which create productive forest ecosystems that actually increase biodiversity while providing human resources, are being refined to emphasize species that are more tolerant of variable water availability. These modifications maintain the ecological principles that make forest gardens sustainable while adapting to changing environmental conditions. The storage systems for both water and food are receiving increased attention and investment as communities recognize the importance of maintaining adequate reserves during periods of uncertainty. Underground storage chambers are being improved to maintain optimal temperature and humidity conditions for preserving food supplies. Water storage vessels are being manufactured in larger sizes and with improved designs that minimize evaporation and contamination. These investments represent prudent responses to increasing environmental variability rather than crisis preparations. The trade relationships that have always included provisions for mutual assistance during environmental challenges are being strengthened and formalized as communities recognize the value of expanded support networks. Cities that enjoy more reliable water sources are entering into agreements to provide assistance to communities that experience periodic water stress. These relationships maintain the principles of reciprocity and mutual aid that have always characterized Maya political systems while extending their reach to address changing environmental conditions. Imagine yourself participating in one of the community meetings where water allocation decisions are made through the careful consensus-building processes that characterize Maya governance. These gatherings involve not just political leaders, but also water system specialists, agricultural experts, and representatives from different residential areas within the city. The discussions that take place in these meetings demonstrate the sophisticated understanding of hydrology, ecology, and social organization that enables Maya communities to manage their water resources effectively even under challenging conditions. The ceremonial aspects of water management are becoming more elaborate and more central to community life as the spiritual significance of water resources receives increased recognition. The rain god Chak, who has always held an important place in Maya religious practice, is receiving more frequent and more elaborate offerings. Ceremonies designed to ensure adequate rainfall and to express gratitude for water resources are being performed with greater frequency and community participation. These spiritual practices provide both psychological comfort and social cohesion during periods of environmental uncertainty. The architectural modifications being made to existing buildings increasingly emphasize water collection and conservation. Rooftop systems for capturing rainwater are being improved and expanded. Courtyard designs are being modified to channel rainwater into storage systems more effectively. Building foundations are being adjusted to include better drainage systems that prevent water loss while protecting structures from moisture damage. These modifications represent the practical application of traditional Maya building knowledge to address changing environmental conditions. The craft industries that depend on water for their production processes are adapting their techniques to maintain quality while using water more efficiently. Pottery workshops are developing new methods for clay preparation that require less water while maintaining the plasticity needed for shaping vessels. Textile production facilities are modifying their dyeing and washing processes to conserve water while maintaining the quality and variety of fabrics that are essential for both local use and trade. These adaptations maintain the economic activities that support Maya communities while acknowledging the changing availability of water resources. The medicinal practices that form an important part of Maya healthcare are being adjusted to account for changes in the availability of plants that require specific moisture conditions for optimal growth. Healers whose knowledge includes detailed understanding of plant ecology are modifying their collection schedules and sometimes substituting alternative plants for traditional remedies. The flexibility of Maya medical knowledge allows for these adaptations while maintaining the effectiveness of healing practices. The educational systems that transmit knowledge about water management from one generation to the next are placing increased emphasis on conservation techniques and adaptive strategies. Young people are being taught not just traditional water management methods, but also the principles underlying these methods, so they can modify and improve them as conditions continue to change. This emphasis on understanding principles rather than just following procedures ensures that Maya water management knowledge will continue to evolve effectively. The record-keeping systems that track water availability, distribution patterns, and conservation techniques are being expanded to document the changes being observed and the adaptations being implemented. Maya scribes are creating detailed accounts of new water management techniques and modified distribution procedures, ensuring that future generations will have access to the knowledge being developed during this period of transition. These records represent an investment in future adaptability and demonstrate the Maya commitment to learning from experience. The psychological and social adaptations that accompany changing water availability demonstrate the resilience of Maya cultural systems. Communities are developing new traditions and social practices that emphasize conservation and sharing. Storytelling traditions are incorporating new narratives about the wise management of precious resources. Social norms are evolving to encourage behaviors that support community-wide water conservation efforts. As the decades of the 9th century progress, the cumulative effect of these adaptations creates Maya communities that are more efficient in their use of water resources, more sophisticated in their management techniques, and more resilient to environmental variability than they were before these challenges arose. The changes in water availability that might have overwhelmed less adaptable societies are instead driving innovations that strengthen Maya civilization and enhance its sustainability. The remarkable thing about Maya responses to changing water conditions is not that they require adaptations. All successful societies must adapt to environmental variability, but that Maya society possesses such sophisticated mechanisms for making these adaptations effectively. The combination of advanced engineering knowledge, flexible social organization, and spiritual practices that emphasize proper relationships with natural forces creates a framework for addressing environmental challenges that is both practical and meaningful. The water management innovations that emerge during this period become permanent additions to Maya technological knowledge, enhancing the civilization's capacity to thrive under diverse environmental conditions. The social and spiritual practices that develop around water conservation become integral parts of Maya culture, strengthening community bonds while supporting sustainable resource use. The governance systems that facilitate community decision-making about water allocation demonstrate the effectiveness of Maya political organization in addressing collective challenges. As you allow yourself to drift deeper into peaceful rest, let the gentle sound of water, whether rain on leaves, streams flowing over stones, or the quiet splash of a gourd dipping into a cenote, remind you of the patient wisdom with which the Maya approached the challenge of living successfully with water in a world where its availability could never be taken for granted. Their responses to changing water conditions demonstrate that human ingenuity and cooperation can find creative solutions to environmental challenges, that adaptation can strengthen rather than weaken civilizations, and that the most profound resilience often emerges from the careful tending of essential relationships between human communities and a natural world that sustains them. The rivers of memory that flow through Maya consciousness carry with them not the fear of scarcity, but the wisdom of conservation, not the anxiety of uncertainty, but the confidence that comes from understanding natural patterns, not the desperation of crisis, but the patient intelligence that knows how to work with changing conditions rather than against them. These are the currents that will carry Maya civilization through this period of transformation and into whatever future awaits beyond the gentle horizon of change. As we allow time to carry us deeper into this gentle mystery, drifting now through the final decades of the 9th century and into the early years of the 10th, imagine yourself walking through the forest that surrounds and interpenetrates the great Maya cities. This is not the dark, forbidding wilderness that European imaginations might conjure, but rather a living library of botanical knowledge, a carefully tended garden that extends for thousands of square miles, where every tree, vine, and flowering plant has been known and named and understood by generations of Maya forest keepers. You've learned to move through this green world with the quiet grace of someone who understands that the forest is always speaking, always offering its wisdom to those who know how to listen. The rustle of leaves in the canopy above tells you about wind patterns and approaching weather. The calls of birds hidden in the emerald shadows provide information about the time of day, the season, and the health of the ecosystem around you. The scent carried on the humid air, whether it's the sweet fragrance of blooming sapodilla trees or the rich, earthy smell of decomposing leaves, offers clues about moisture levels, plant phenology, and the countless invisible processes that maintain the forest's complex balance. Now, as you move through this familiar green cathedral with the practiced eye of someone who has spent a lifetime reading its subtle messages, you begin to notice that the forest itself is whispering new stories, sharing observations about changes that are occurring so gradually that they might escape the attention of less attentive observers. These are not dramatic transformations that announce themselves with falling trees or obvious die-offs, but rather the gentle shifts in species composition growth patterns, and ecological relationships that reflect the forest's patient response to changing environmental conditions. The cecropia trees, those fast-growing pioneers that colonize forest clearings and provide early succession habitat, are appearing in places where they weren't common before. Their broad, palmate leaves and hollow stems, which normally indicate areas of recent disturbance or natural tree falls, are now becoming more frequent in areas that have been stable forest for decades. This increase in pioneer species suggests that the forest is experiencing subtle stresses that are creating more opportunities for early succession plants to establish themselves. The mahogany trees, those magnificent giants that can live for centuries and whose wood is prized for both construction and ceremonial purposes, are showing signs of slower growth and reduced reproduction. The massive buttress trunks that have served as landmarks for generations continue to dominate the forest canopy, but fewer young mahogany trees are successfully establishing themselves in the understory. This pattern suggests that the environmental conditions needed for mahogany regeneration, specific combinations of moisture, light, and soil conditions, are becoming less favorable. Let your imagination follow the vertical layers of the forest, from the emergent canopy that reaches toward the sky to the shadowy understory where you walk. Each layer represents a different microenvironment with its own characteristic species and ecological relationships. The epiphytes, those air plants, orchids, and bromeliads that live without soil in the forks and crevices of tree branches, are particularly sensitive indicators of changing moisture conditions. Some species that once thrived in the middle canopy are becoming less common, while others that prefer drier conditions are expanding their ranges. The Mayan nut trees, whose protein-rich seeds have provided food security for Maya communities for generations, are showing subtle changes in their fruiting patterns. These remarkable trees, which can produce nutritious seeds for hundreds of years, normally fruit according to predictable seasonal cycles that Maya communities have learned to anticipate and plan around. Now, some trees are fruiting slightly earlier or later than traditional patterns would suggest, while others are producing smaller crops than expected based on their size and previous performance. The understory plants that provide medicinal materials for Maya healers are displaying their own responses to changing environmental conditions. Some medicinal plants that prefer consistently moist conditions are becoming harder to find in their traditional locations, requiring healers to travel further from cities to gather necessary materials. Other plants that tolerate more variable moisture conditions are becoming more abundant, creating opportunities for healers to expand their pharmacological knowledge while adapting to changing resource availability. Picture yourself accompanying one of the Maya forest specialists, perhaps a daykeeper whose knowledge includes detailed understanding of plant calendars, or a healer whose training encompasses the medicinal properties of hundreds of forest species. These individuals possess encyclopedic knowledge of forest ecology that has been accumulated over generations of careful observation and experimentation. They know which plants bloom in response to specific combinations of temperature and moisture, which animals depend on particular trees for food and shelter, and how the complex web of relationships between species creates the stability that allows tropical forests to thrive. Now, these forest specialists are observing patterns that require subtle adjustments to traditional knowledge. The timing of fruit production by different tree species is shifting slightly, affecting the animals that depend on these food sources and the human communities that harvest surplus fruit for their own use. The flowering schedules of plants that provide nectar for bees and other pollinators are changing, requiring adjustments in beekeeping practices and sometimes affecting honey production. The growth patterns of fiber plants used for textile production are modified, necessitating changes in harvesting techniques and processing methods. The animal populations that form integral parts of forest ecosystems are also responding to these gradual environmental changes. The howler monkeys, whose dawn choruses have awakened Maya communities for centuries, are adjusting their territorial ranges slightly, following the shifting distributions of their preferred food trees. The jaguar, that magnificent predator whose presence indicates healthy forest ecosystems, maintains its territorial patterns, but may be finding that prey distributions are changing as herbivorous animals respond to modified plant communities. The bird populations that play crucial roles in seed dispersal and insect control are showing subtle shifts in their seasonal behaviors and habitat preferences. Some species that traditionally nested in specific forest layers are choosing different locations as microclimatic conditions change. Others are modifying their migration patterns slightly, arriving at breeding grounds a few days earlier or later than traditional schedules would predict. These changes don't represent ecosystem collapse, but rather the ongoing adjustments that characterize healthy ecological communities responding to environmental change. The insect communities that form the foundation of forest food webs are demonstrating remarkable adaptability to changing conditions. Some species that require specific moisture levels for reproduction are becoming less common, while others that tolerate more variable conditions are expanding their populations. The complex relationships between plants and their insect pollinators are requiring subtle adjustments as flowering times and insect emergence schedules shift slightly in response to changing environmental cues. The Maya understanding of forest management has always emphasized the importance of maintaining ecosystem health while harvesting resources for human use. This sophisticated approach to agroforestry creates forest gardens that actually increase biodiversity while providing food, medicine, building materials, and other necessities. Now, forest management practices are being refined to account for changing ecological patterns, with increased emphasis on maintaining species diversity and ecosystem resilience. The harvesting schedules that govern when and how much of different forest resources can be sustainably collected are being adjusted to account for changing patterns of plant growth and reproduction. Maya forest managers, whose knowledge represents centuries of accumulated experience with sustainable resource use, are modifying traditional harvesting calendars to ensure that plant populations remain healthy under changing environmental conditions. These adjustments maintain the principles of sustainable harvesting while adapting to new realities. The cultivation practices used in forest gardens are being enhanced to support species that are showing increased stress under changing conditions. Additional care is being provided to ensure that valuable food and medicinal plants continue to thrive, while new species that are better adapted to changing conditions are being incorporated into managed forest areas. These practices demonstrate the adaptive capacity of Maya agricultural and forest management systems. The fire management techniques that Maya communities use to maintain forest health and create productive agricultural areas are being modified to account for changing moisture patterns and plant community responses. Controlled burning, which has always been an important tool for forest management, requires more careful timing and more precise control as vegetation moisture levels become less predictable. Maya fire managers are developing new techniques that maintain the benefits of controlled burning while reducing risks associated with changing environmental conditions. The spiritual and ceremonial relationships that connect Maya communities to forest ecosystems are deepening as people recognize the forest's vulnerability to changing conditions. Ceremonies that honor forest spirits and seek their protection for ecosystem health are being performed with greater frequency and community participation. These spiritual practices provide both psychological comfort and social cohesion, while reinforcing cultural values that emphasize proper relationships between humans and the natural world. The knowledge transmission systems that preserve forest wisdom are being enhanced to ensure that future generations will possess the information needed to maintain healthy relationships with changing forest ecosystems. Young people are receiving more intensive training in forest ecology and management techniques, with particular emphasis on developing the observational skills needed to detect and respond to environmental changes. This educational emphasis ensures the continuity of forest management knowledge while preparing communities for continued adaptation. The trade relationships that depend on forest products are being adjusted to account for changing patterns of resource availability and quality. Communities that specialize in particular forest products are diversifying their production to reduce dependence on species that are showing stress under changing conditions. Trade networks are being modified to ensure that communities have access to essential forest products even when local availability changes. The construction techniques that use forest materials are being refined to make more efficient use of available wood while maintaining the quality and durability of buildings. Maya architects and builders are developing new methods for selecting and preparing timber that maximize its useful life while minimizing the impact on forest resources. These innovations maintain the tradition of wooden construction while adapting to changing resource availability. The artistic traditions that use forest materials for sculpture, musical instruments, and decorative objects are adapting to work with alternative materials when traditional sources become less available. Maya artists are experimenting with new techniques and materials while maintaining the aesthetic and cultural values that define their artistic traditions. These adaptations ensure the continuity of artistic expression while acknowledging changing environmental conditions. As the forest continues its quiet conversation about the changes occurring in its green realm, Maya communities demonstrate their remarkable ability to listen carefully to these subtle messages and to respond with wisdom and creativity. The forest management practices that emerge during this period represent some of the most sophisticated examples of sustainable resource use ever developed, creating systems that maintain ecosystem health while supporting human communities. The ecological knowledge that Maya communities develop during this period of environmental change becomes a permanent part of their cultural heritage, enhancing their ability to live successfully in forest environments under diverse conditions. The spiritual practices that connect human communities to forest ecosystems are strengthened by the recognition that proper relationships with a natural world require constant attention and careful adaptation to changing conditions. The forest management innovations that emerge from this period of gentle environmental change demonstrate that human societies can respond to ecological challenges in ways that strengthen rather than weaken their relationships with natural systems. The Maya approach to forest stewardship, which emphasizes understanding and cooperation rather than domination and exploitation, provide a model for sustainable living that remains relevant long after the immediate challenges have passed. As you allow the quiet voices of the forest to carry you deeper into peaceful rest, let the gentle sounds of the tropical night, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant call of night birds, the quiet drip of moisture from the canopy, remind you of the patient wisdom with which Maya communities approach their relationship with the living world around them. Their responses to changing forest conditions demonstrate that human intelligence and natural wisdom can work together to create solutions that benefit both people and ecosystems, that adaptation can enhance rather than diminish the beauty and complexity of the relationships between human cultures and natural environments. The forest continues its eternal conversation, sharing its knowledge with those who know how to listen, offering its resources to those who understand how to receive them respectfully, providing its wisdom to those who recognize that human prosperity and natural health are not separate goals, but different aspects of the same essential harmony. In this green sanctuary of accumulated knowledge and patient adaptation, the Maya find not just survival, but a model for living that honors both human needs and natural processes, creating a legacy of ecological wisdom that continues to whisper its gentle teachings through the emerald corridors of time. As we allow time to flow forward like a gentle river meandering toward the sea, carrying us into the early decades of the 10th century, imagine yourself standing at the intersection of several ancient roads that connect the great Maya cities. These aren't the rough forest paths that might come to mind when we think of pre-Columbian travel, but rather sophisticated engineering marvels, raised stone causeways called sakbiab, meaning white roads, that stretch in perfectly straight lines across swamps, through forests, and over hills for distances that can span dozens of miles. Picture the smooth limestone surface beneath your feet, still gleaming white in the dappled sunlight that filters through the forest canopy overhead. These roads represent one of the Maya's most impressive technological achievements, requiring sophisticated surveying techniques, massive labor coordination, and engineering knowledge that enabled builders to maintain perfectly straight alignments across varied terrain. The road you're standing on might connect Koba to Yaksuna, a distance of over 60 miles, or perhaps link Uxmal to Kaba in the Puyuk Hills, or extend from El Mirador to any number of smaller centers across the Pedon Lowlands. But now, as you settle into the gentle rhythm of evening contemplation, let yourself notice that these ancient highways are beginning to tell new stories about the changing patterns of movement and connection that characterize Maya civilization during this period of quiet transformation. The frequency of travel along these roads, while still substantial, has begun to show subtle modifications that reflect the broader changes occurring throughout the Maya world. The steady stream of merchants, pilgrims, diplomats, and messengers that once moved constantly along these white pathways now follows slightly different rhythms, adapted to new patterns of resource availability and political relationship. Imagine yourself as one of the long-distance traders whose families have traveled these roads for generations, carrying precious goods between distant cities and maintaining the commercial networks that bind Maya civilization together. Your knowledge includes not just the most efficient routes between major centers, but also the intimate details of travel logistics, where to find reliable water sources along the way, which communities offer the best hospitality to travelers, how to time journeys to take advantage of seasonal weather patterns, and which goods are most valued in different regions. The trade goods that move along these ancient highways reflect the incredible diversity and sophistication of Maya economic networks. Jade from the Motagua Valley travels northward to the Yucatan Peninsula, while salt from coastal lagoons moves inland to highland communities. Obsidian blades from volcanic regions are exchanged for textiles woven in cities known for their skilled artisans. Cacao beans, which serve both as luxury food and as currency, flow along these routes carrying value and flavor from tropical lowlands to drier regions where the sacred chocolate trees cannot grow. Now, the patterns of this trade are showing subtle adaptations to changing circumstances throughout the Maya world. Some routes that once carried heavy traffic are experiencing lighter use as certain resources become less available or as communities modify their consumption patterns in response to changing environmental conditions. Other pathways are seeing increased traffic as traders diversify their routes and goods to maintain commercial relationships despite shifting resource patterns. The way stations that provide rest and resupply for travelers along these roads are adapting their services to accommodate changing travel patterns. These facilities, which might include simple shelters, water sources, food supplies, and storage areas for trade goods, are being modified to serve travelers whose journeys may take longer due to more cautious travel planning or who may be carrying different types of goods than in previous generations. The hospitality networks that support long-distance travel are demonstrating the same flexibility and adaptability that characterizes all aspects of Maya civilization. Let your imagination follow one of these white roads as it approaches a major Maya city, perhaps Caracol or Tikal, and notice how the suburbs and satellite communities that surround these urban centers are showing their own adaptations to changing times. The residential areas that house farmers, craftspeople, and service providers are becoming more self-sufficient, with enhanced food storage facilities and more sophisticated water collection systems. These communities are maintaining their connections to the central cities while also developing greater resilience and independence. The market areas where long-distance traders meet local producers and consumers are showing modifications in their organization and the range of goods they handle. Markets that once specialized in particular types of trade goods are diversifying their offerings to maintain economic vitality despite changes in the availability of traditional products. New types of goods are appearing in markets as traders and producers adapt to changing resource patterns and consumer needs. The political relationships that govern trade between different Maya cities are being adjusted to account for changing economic and environmental conditions. Treaties that once focused primarily on commercial privileges and transportation rights now include provisions for mutual assistance during periods of resource scarcity. Diplomatic protocols are being modified to address the need for more flexible and cooperative approaches to managing trade relationships during times of environmental uncertainty. Picture yourself participating in one of the diplomatic missions that travel these roads to maintain relationships between Maya city-states. These delegations might include not just political ambassadors, but also specialists in astronomy, engineering, and resource management who share knowledge and techniques between communities. The diplomatic protocols that govern these interactions are becoming more focused on cooperation and mutual support as Maya leaders recognize the value of sharing innovations and strategies for adapting to changing conditions. The ceremonial aspects of long-distance travel are being enhanced to acknowledge the spiritual significance of maintaining connections between communities during challenging times. Pilgrimages to important religious sites are becoming more elaborate, with greater emphasis on community participation and spiritual preparation. The rituals performed at the beginning and end of journeys are being expanded to seek divine protection and guidance for travelers and their missions. The information networks that travel along these roads are becoming more sophisticated as communities recognize the importance of sharing knowledge about changing environmental conditions and successful adaptations. Travelers now carry not just trade goods, but also detailed information about water availability, crop performance, new techniques for resource management, and innovations in technology or social organization. This information exchange helps all Maya communities benefit from the experiences and discoveries of others. The maintenance systems that keep these roads in good condition are being enhanced to ensure reliable transportation despite changing environmental conditions. Road crews are paying increased attention to drainage systems that prevent water damage during irregular rainfall patterns. Bridge and causeway maintenance is being scheduled more frequently to ensure safe passage across water features that may be experiencing changed flow patterns. These infrastructure investments demonstrate the Maya commitment to maintaining the connections that bind their civilization together. The navigation and timing systems that guide long-distance travel are being adjusted to account for changing seasonal patterns and travel conditions. The astronomical knowledge that helps travelers determine optimal departure times and navigate accurately across long distances is being refined to accommodate subtle shifts in weather patterns and seasonal timing. Travel schedules are becoming more flexible to allow for unexpected delays or changes in route conditions. The security systems that protect travelers and trade goods are being modified to address changing patterns of territorial control and resource availability. Communities along major trade routes are strengthening their ability to provide protection and assistance to travelers, while trade protocols are being adjusted to ensure safe passage even when political relationships are strained by environmental challenges. The loading and transportation technologies used for moving goods along these roads are being improved to handle changing types of cargo and travel conditions. New techniques for packing and securing trade goods are being developed to protect valuable materials during longer or more difficult journeys. Transportation equipment is being modified to operate more efficiently under changing environmental conditions. Imagine yourself resting for the evening at one of the way stations along these ancient roads, sharing a meal and conversation with other travelers whose journeys have brought them from distant parts of the Maya world. The stories exchanged around these fires include not just news about political events and commercial opportunities, but also detailed accounts of how different communities are adapting to changing environmental conditions. These conversations create informal networks for sharing knowledge and innovations that help all Maya communities strengthen their resilience and adaptability. The cultural exchanges that occur along these trade routes are becoming more focused on sharing adaptive strategies and innovations. Communities that have developed particularly effective techniques for water management, agricultural adaptation, or resource conservation are sharing this knowledge with travelers who carry it to other regions. These cultural exchanges help spread innovations rapidly throughout the Maya world, enhancing the overall adaptability of Maya civilization. The economic innovations that emerge from changing trade patterns include new forms of currency and exchange systems that are more flexible and resilient than traditional arrangements. Barter systems are being refined to handle situations where traditional trade goods may be temporarily unavailable. Credit and reciprocity arrangements are being expanded to provide greater flexibility for communities experiencing temporary resource challenges. The technological innovations that travel along these roads include new techniques for transportation, preservation of goods, and communication across long distances. Improvements in container design help preserve food and other perishables during longer journeys. New signaling systems help coordinate travel and communication between communities. Enhanced map-making techniques provide more accurate information about routes and travel conditions. As the decades of the 10th century unfold, the networks of roads that connect Maya communities continue to serve their essential function of maintaining the connections that make Maya civilization possible. The adaptations being made to travel patterns, trade relationships, and information exchange demonstrate the flexibility and wisdom of Maya approaches to maintaining social and economic networks during periods of environmental change. The remarkable thing about Maya responses to changing travel and trade conditions is not that adaptations are necessary. All complex societies must adapt their transportation and commercial systems to changing circumstances, but that Maya society possesses such sophisticated mechanisms for making these adaptations smoothly and effectively. The road networks that connect Maya communities represent more than just transportation infrastructure. They embody the social, economic, and cultural relationships that define Maya civilization. The innovations in travel, trade, and communication that emerged during this period become permanent improvements to Maya transportation systems, enhancing the civilization's ability to maintain connections and share resources under diverse conditions. The diplomatic and commercial protocols that are developed to address changing circumstances create more flexible and resilient relationships between communities. The information exchange systems that evolve to share knowledge about environmental adaptations help all Maya communities benefit from collective experience and innovation. The white roads that stretch across the Maya landscape continue to serve as arteries of connection and communication, carrying not just goods and people, but also the ideas, innovations, and cultural exchanges that maintain the vitality of Maya civilization. The pathways through the gathering dusk are not routes of retreat or decline, but highways of adaptation and renewal, carrying Maya communities toward a future that will require new forms of connection and cooperation. As you allow the gentle rhythm of evening to carry you toward peaceful rest, let the image of these ancient white roads stretching across the moonlit landscape remind you of the patient wisdom with which human communities have always maintained their connections during times of change. The Maya understanding that civilization depends not just on individual communities, but on the networks of relationship and exchange that connect them provides a model for maintaining social cohesion and mutual support during periods of transition. The pathways that wind through the forests and across the hills of the Maya world carry more than commerce and communication. They carry the threads of relationship that weave individual communities into the larger tapestry of civilization. These roads remind us that human societies are not isolated islands, but interconnected networks of cooperation and exchange, and that the strength of these networks often determines how successfully communities can navigate the challenges and opportunities that arise from changing circumstances. In the gentle, gathering dusk, as the last travelers of the day seek shelter and rest along these ancient highways, the roads themselves settle into quiet patience, ready to serve tomorrow's journeys while holding in their limestone surfaces the accumulated wisdom of countless generations who understood that the connections between communities are among the most precious and essential elements of any lasting civilization. Let time carry you forward now, gently and peacefully, into the latter decades of the 10th century, when the remarkable tradition of Maya writing begins to undergo one of the most poignant and mysterious transformations in the history of human communication. Picture yourself in the workshop of a master scribe, perhaps in the royal palace at Tikal or in a secluded scriptorium at Köpen, surrounded by the tools and materials that have served Maya writers for nearly 1,000 years. Obsidian blades for carving, brushes made from fine animal hair, pigments ground from minerals and plants, and most importantly, the smooth limestone surfaces and bark paper codices that have preserved Maya thoughts and knowledge for centuries. The soft light filtering through the doorway illuminates thousands of glyphs, those elegant, complex symbols that represent one of humanity's most sophisticated writing systems. Each glyph is a work of art as well as a unit of communication, combining phonetic elements that represent sounds with logographic symbols that convey complete concepts. The Maya script can record anything that can be spoken: historical events, astronomical observations, mathematical calculations, poetry, prophecy, and the intimate details of daily life. It's a writing system so flexible and expressive that it rivals any ever developed by human civilization. Now, as you settle into the contemplative rhythm of evening, imagine yourself as one of these scribes whose craft represents the culmination of centuries of intellectual achievement. Your training has taken years to complete, involving not just the memorization of hundreds of glyphs and their various meanings, but also the mastery of mathematics, astronomy, history, and theology that enables you to record the complex knowledge systems of Maya civilization. You are among perhaps a few thousand people in the entire Maya world who possess full literacy, the ability to read and write the complete range of texts that preserve and transmit Maya culture. The work you do extends far beyond simple record keeping. When you carve a text into stone, you're creating a permanent monument that will communicate across centuries. When you paint glyphs on pottery or write on bark paper, you're participating in an intellectual tradition that connects you to scholars and artists who lived centuries before your birth and will inspire those who come after you. The act of writing in Maya culture is both practical communication and sacred art, both historical documentation and spiritual practice. But now, as the 10th century progresses, you've begun to notice subtle changes in the patterns of demand for your services and the types of texts that patrons are requesting. The great commemorative monuments that once marked every significant event in the lives of Maya rulers are being commissioned less frequently. The elaborate historical inscriptions that celebrated military victories, royal marriages, and dynastic successions are becoming shorter and less complex. The astronomical texts that once filled lengthy codices with precise calculations are being condensed into more practical, everyday formats. This transformation isn't occurring suddenly or dramatically. There are no royal decrees abolishing writing, no invasions that destroy libraries, no catastrophic events that interrupt the transmission of knowledge. Instead, the change unfolds with the same gentle patience that characterizes all aspects of Maya adaptation to their changing world. Scribes continue to work, students continue to learn, and texts continue to be produced, but the overall patterns of literary production are shifting in ways that reflect the broader transformations occurring throughout Maya society. Let your imagination drift to the royal court where decisions about major inscriptions are made. The discussions that take place in these chambers involve not just rulers and their advisors, but also astronomers who calculate optimal timing for ceremonies, historians who research appropriate precedents for new monuments, and engineers who plan the logistics of major construction projects. These conversations are becoming more focused on practical considerations: the cost of quarrying and transporting large stones, the availability of skilled craftspeople, the allocation of resources between different competing priorities. The scribes who serve these courts are finding that their expertise is being directed toward different types of projects than in previous generations. Rather than creating elaborate monuments that will stand for millennia, they're focusing more on practical texts that serve immediate administrative and ceremonial needs. Account books that track resource allocation, correspondence that maintains diplomatic relationships, and instructional texts that preserve essential technical knowledge are receiving increased attention and resources. The training systems that produce new generations of scribes are adapting to these changing demands by emphasizing practical literacy skills alongside the traditional scholarly training in astronomy and mathematics. Young scribes are learning not just how to create monumental inscriptions, but also how to produce the everyday texts that keep Maya society functioning effectively. This educational evolution ensures that Maya literacy will continue to serve the needs of communities even as those needs change. Picture yourself working on one of the stone monuments that will, unknown to you at the time, be among the last great inscriptions carved in the classical Maya style. The text you're creating might commemorate the completion of a calendar cycle, the dedication of a temple, or the accession of a new ruler. The glyphs flowing from your obsidian blade onto the limestone surface represent the culmination of centuries of artistic and intellectual tradition, each symbol precisely formed according to conventions that have been refined over generations of scribal practice. The astronomical observations that form an important component of many Maya texts are continuing with the same precision and sophistication that has characterized Maya science for centuries. Scribes are still recording the movements of Venus, the timing of eclipses, and the complex cycles that govern Maya calendar systems. However, these observations are increasingly being recorded in practical formats, tables and charts that can be easily consulted for agricultural and ceremonial planning rather than elaborate texts that embed astronomical data within historical narratives. The historical records that preserve the genealogies and achievements of Maya ruling families are being maintained, but with modifications that reflect changing political circumstances. Dynastic histories are being condensed to focus on essential information rather than elaborate celebrations of royal achievements. Political alliances and territorial claims are being documented in practical formats that can be easily updated as circumstances change. These modifications maintain the essential functions of historical record-keeping while adapting to new political and social realities. The religious and ceremonial texts that guide Maya spiritual practices are showing their own patterns of adaptation. Traditional prayers and ritual instructions are being preserved, but they're being supplemented with new texts that address the spiritual dimensions of environmental change and social adaptation. Ceremonial calendars are being adjusted to account for changing seasonal patterns while maintaining their essential religious functions. These spiritual adaptations demonstrate the flexibility of Maya religious systems and their ability to provide guidance during periods of transition. The mathematical and engineering texts that preserve technical knowledge are receiving increased attention as communities recognize the importance of maintaining and improving their technological capabilities. Instructional manuals for construction techniques, water management systems, and agricultural practices are being created in more detailed and accessible formats. Mathematical tables and calculation methods are being documented more systematically to ensure that essential technical knowledge will be preserved for future generations. The literary traditions that include poetry, mythology, and narrative histories are being adapted to reflect new themes and concerns. Stories that once focused primarily on military conquest and royal achievement are being supplemented with narratives that emphasize community cooperation, environmental wisdom, and successful adaptation to challenging circumstances. These literary innovations maintain the cultural functions of storytelling while addressing contemporary concerns and values. The artistic aspects of Maya writing are evolving to accommodate new aesthetic preferences and practical constraints. Glyphs are being simplified slightly to reduce the time and skill required for their creation while maintaining their essential communicative functions. Artistic conventions are being modified to work effectively with new materials and techniques. These artistic adaptations ensure that Maya writing remains both beautiful and practical under changing circumstances. The preservation systems that maintain written records for future reference are being improved to ensure that essential knowledge will remain available despite changing storage conditions and access patterns. Libraries and archives are being reorganized to prioritize the most crucial texts while maintaining comprehensive collections. Copying programs are being established to create multiple versions of important documents, reducing the risk of knowledge loss due to damage or deterioration. The translation and interpretation systems that make written knowledge accessible to non-literate community members are being expanded and refined. Scribes are devoting more attention to creating summaries and explanations that make complex texts understandable to broader audiences. Oral traditions are being strengthened to supplement written records and ensure that essential knowledge remains accessible even if written texts become unavailable. As you imagine yourself participating in this gentle transformation of Maya literary culture, You begin to appreciate that what you're witnessing is not the decline of a great intellectual tradition, but rather its thoughtful adaptation to changing circumstances. The scribes who continue to work during this period are not simply maintaining old practices, but actively innovating to ensure that Maya writing will continue to serve the needs of their communities under new conditions. The reduction in monumental inscriptions doesn't represent a loss of Maya intellectual capabilities, but rather a reallocation of those capabilities toward more practical and immediate needs. The simplification of certain literary forms doesn't indicate cultural decline, but rather the maturation of writing systems that have learned to balance elaborate artistic expression with efficient communication. The increased focus on practical texts doesn't suggest a loss of interest in scholarship, but rather the wisdom of communities that understand the importance of preserving essential knowledge in accessible formats. The last great inscriptions being carved during this period represent not endings, but culminations. The final expressions of artistic and intellectual traditions that have reached full maturity and are now being transformed into new forms that will better serve changing needs. These monuments preserve not just historical information, but also the aesthetic and intellectual achievements of Maya civilization at its peak, creating permanent records that will inspire future generations, even as contemporary practices evolve. The scribes who create these final monuments understand that they are participating in a historic transition, though they may not fully comprehend its ultimate significance. They approach their work with the same dedication and skill that has characterized Maya scholarship for centuries, ensuring that these last expressions of classical Maya writing achieve the highest standards of artistic and intellectual excellence. The workshops where these final texts are created maintain the same reverent atmosphere that has always characterized Maya intellectual work. The careful preparation of materials, the precise execution of glyphs, the collaborative discussions between scribes and scholars. All of these traditional practices continue unchanged, creating continuity with past traditions even as the overall patterns of literary production evolve. As the twilight deepens around these ancient workshops, and the last glyphs of the classical period take shape under the skilled hands of master scribes, there's no sense of ending or loss, but rather a feeling of completion and transformation. The intellectual achievements preserved in these final monuments will endure for millennia, carrying Maya wisdom forward into an uncertain future, while the living tradition of Maya writing adapts to serve new generations under new circumstances. The evening light that illuminates these final carving sessions seems to hold within it all the accumulated wisdom of Maya civilization, the mathematical insights that enabled precise astronomical observations, the historical knowledge that preserved the achievements of countless generations, the artistic vision that transformed communication into beauty, and the practical intelligence that adapted all of these traditions to serve human needs under changing conditions. As you allow yourself to drift toward peaceful rest, let the image of these dedicated scribes working by lamplight in their quiet workshops remind you that human knowledge and creativity never truly disappear, but rather transform themselves into new forms that serve new needs. The last glyphs carved in twilight represent not the end of Maya intellectual achievement, but rather its metamorphosis into forms that will continue to serve human communities with the same wisdom and beauty that have always characterized the finest expressions of human thought and creativity. As time flows gently forward into the middle decades of the 10th century, carrying us deeper into this mystery of transformation, imagine yourself standing in one of the great plazas that have served as the heart of Maya urban life for centuries. The morning mist still clings to the steps of pyramids and the familiar sounds of daily life. Children playing, merchants calling, artisans at work continue to echo off the limestone walls just as they have for generations. Yet if you possess the perspective of someone who has observed this civilization across decades, you begin to notice subtle changes in the rhythms and patterns of urban life that speak to a profound and peaceful transformation taking place in Maya society. The great cities that once drew people from across the countryside like magnets are beginning to experience a gentle dispersal of their populations. This isn't the sudden abandonment that dramatic stories might suggest, but rather a gradual process where families and communities make thoughtful decisions about where and how they want to live in response to changing circumstances. Some choose to remain in the urban centers, maintaining the traditions and institutions that have defined Maya civilization for centuries. Others decide to establish new communities in different locations, carrying with them the knowledge, skills, and cultural practices that will allow Maya ways of life to flourish in new settings. Picture a Maya family making such a decision. Perhaps a master craftsperson whose skills in jade carving or textile production are valued wherever Maya culture exists, or a farmer whose knowledge of agricultural techniques can create productive fields in new locations. These aren't desperate refugees fleeing catastrophe, but rather thoughtful people who recognize that the changing environmental and social conditions offer opportunities to create new forms of community life that maintain the essential values of Maya civilization while adapting to contemporary realities. The movement of people from urban centers to smaller communities and new settlements follows ancient patterns of Maya mobility and adaptation. Throughout their history, the Maya have been a remarkably mobile people, establishing new communities when opportunities arose, abandoning settlements when conditions became unfavorable, and maintaining cultural continuity through networks of kinship, trade, and shared tradition that transcended any particular location. This latest phase of dispersal represents the continuation of these time-tested strategies for maintaining cultural vitality under changing circumstances. The knowledge and skills that travel with these dispersing communities represent the true wealth of Maya civilization. Master architects carry with them the understanding of how to design buildings that remain cool in tropical heat and dry during heavy rains. Agricultural specialists bring knowledge of which crops grow best in different soil and climate conditions. Astronomers and calendar keepers preserve the mathematical and observational knowledge that enables communities to maintain proper relationships with cosmic cycles. Healers and midwives carry the medical knowledge that keeps communities healthy and helps them thrive in new environments. The cultural practices that bind Maya communities together, the ceremonies that mark important life transitions, the storytelling traditions that preserve historical knowledge, the artistic techniques that create objects of beauty and meaning, travel with these dispersing populations like seeds carried on the wind. Each new community that forms becomes a center for preserving and transmitting Maya culture, ensuring that the wisdom accumulated over centuries will continue to guide future generations, even as the specific forms of social organization evolve to meet new circumstances. The trade networks that have always connected Maya communities adapt to serve these dispersing populations by creating new routes and relationships that maintain economic and cultural connections across wider geographical areas. Merchants whose families have traveled traditional trade routes for generations now explore new pathways that connect emerging communities with established centers. These expanding commercial networks ensure that all Maya communities, regardless of their location, remain connected to the broader cultural and economic systems that define Maya civilization. The political relationships between communities also evolve to accommodate the more dispersed settlement patterns that characterize this period. The traditional city-state system, with its emphasis on central authority and tributary relationships, gives way to more flexible and egalitarian forms of political organization that emphasize cooperation and mutual assistance between autonomous communities. These new political arrangements maintain the essential functions of governance while adapting to circumstances where populations are more widely distributed across the landscape. The agricultural innovations that have always characterized Maya farming are refined and adapted to serve smaller, more dispersed communities that may be working different types of land or dealing with different environmental conditions. The sophisticated techniques for managing water resources, maintaining soil fertility, and maximizing crop yields are modified to work effectively in new settings while maintaining the principles of sustainability that have allowed Maya agriculture to thrive for centuries. The educational systems that transmit essential knowledge from one generation to the next are strengthened and expanded as communities recognize the importance of preserving cultural wisdom during this period of transition. Young people receive more intensive training in the skills and knowledge that will enable them to maintain Maya ways of life in whatever circumstances they may encounter. This educational emphasis ensures that Maya culture will continue to flourish even as its institutional forms evolve. The spiritual and ceremonial practices that connect Maya communities to their understanding of cosmic order and proper relationship with the natural world are maintained and adapted to serve dispersing populations. Sacred sites that have served regional populations for centuries continue to attract pilgrims from new communities, while local ceremonial traditions develop to serve the spiritual needs of smaller, more dispersed groups. These religious adaptations maintain the essential spiritual dimensions of Maya culture while accommodating new social and geographical realities. As you imagine witnessing this gentle transformation, you begin to appreciate that what you're observing represents not the decline of Maya civilization, but rather its wise adaptation to changing circumstances. The dispersal of populations from large urban centers to smaller, more distributed communities represents a return to settlement patterns that have always been part of Maya cultural repertoire, patterns that offer greater resilience and sustainability under challenging environmental conditions. The remarkable thing about this period of Maya history is not that people are making difficult choices about where and how to live. All human societies face such challenges, but that Maya culture possesses such sophisticated mechanisms for maintaining cultural continuity and social cohesion even as the specific forms of social organization change dramatically. The networks of kinship, trade, and shared tradition that bind Maya communities together prove strong enough to maintain cultural unity across increasingly diverse geographical and social circumstances. As evening settles over this transformed landscape, and new communities prepare for rest in locations their grandparents might never have imagined as home, the seeds of Maya culture that have been scattered on ancient winds continue to take root and flourish wherever they land. The dispersal that characterizes this period represents not loss, but multiplication, not ending, but new beginning, not the failure of Maya civilization, but rather its wise adaptation to ensure its survival and prosperity for generations yet to come. As we allow time to carry us forward through the gentle current of centuries, drifting now into the 11th and 12th centuries, imagine yourself walking through what were once the bustling plazas and busy marketplaces of the great Maya cities. The morning light filters through the forest canopy overhead, creating dancing patterns of shadow and sunlight on limestone surfaces that once gleamed white under the open sky. The sound of your footsteps echoes softly off ancient walls, while the calls of tropical birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze create a symphony of natural sounds that speaks to the patient process by which the forest reclaims the works of human hands. This is not a scene of destruction or abandonment, but rather one of the most beautiful and peaceful transformations imaginable. The gentle return of carefully tended urban spaces to their natural forest state. The buildings that once housed thousands of people still stand, their sophisticated engineering and masterful craftsmanship ensuring that they will endure for centuries to come. The pyramids still rise majestically above the canopy, their geometric forms creating a harmonious dialogue between human architectural vision and natural landscape. The ball courts, palaces, and temples remain as testament to the remarkable achievements of Maya civilization, while the forest that surrounds and gradually embraces them demonstrates nature's infinite patience and resilience. Picture yourself as one of the few people who still visit these transforming cities, perhaps a descendant of the original inhabitants who returns periodically to tend ancestral shrines, or a traveler whose trade routes still pass through these ancient centers. You move through these spaces with the reverence of someone who understands that you're walking through a living museum where every carved stone and painted wall preserves the memory of a remarkable civilization, while every vine and tree that grows among the ruins speaks to the ongoing creativity of the natural world. The process by which the forest reclaims these urban spaces unfolds with the same patient rhythm that has characterized all aspects of Maya interaction with their environment. Pioneer plants, those hardy species that specialize in colonizing disturbed areas, are the first to establish themselves in the cracks between paving stones and in the joints of carefully fitted masonry. Cecropia trees, with their broad, umbrella-like leaves, sprout in courtyards where children once played. Wild fig trees send their roots deep into the foundations of ancient buildings, while their branches spread wide to create new canopies above ceremonial plazas. The animals that return to these transforming spaces bring with them the full richness of tropical forest biodiversity. Howler monkeys establish territories among the pyramids, their dawn chorus echoing off limestone walls in ways that create new acoustic experiences in spaces originally designed for human ceremonies. Jaguars pad silently through palace corridors that once witnessed royal court proceedings, while colorful parrots and toucans nest in the nooks and crannies of elaborate architectural facades. As decades pass, the larger trees begin to establish themselves among the ruins, their growth slow but inexorable as they transform the urban landscape into something that blends human achievement with natural beauty in ways that are uniquely magical. Massive mahogany and ceiba trees rise from what were once residential areas, their enormous trunks and spreading canopies creating cathedral-like spaces where shafts of sunlight illuminate moss-covered carvings and vine-draped sculptures. The water management systems that once served these cities continue to function in modified forms, now serving the needs of forest ecosystems rather than human populations. The reservoirs and channels that collected and distributed rainwater during the height of Maya urban civilization now provide water sources for the diverse animal communities that inhabit these transforming spaces. The sophisticated drainage systems prevent erosion and maintain the structural integrity of buildings, while accommodating the different water flow patterns created by forest vegetation. Let your imagination follow the paths and causeways that once connected different parts of these cities, now transformed into forest trails used by deer, peccaries, and other woodland creatures. The white limestone surfaces that provided smooth walking for Maya citizens now offer pathways for tapirs and other large mammals, while the elevated causeways create corridors through the forest that facilitate animal movement and plant dispersal. These ancient transportation networks continue to serve their essential function of connection and movement, though now they serve natural rather than human communities. The astronomical observatories and calendar temples that once enabled Maya astronomers to track celestial movements with remarkable precision continue to mark the passage of time, though now their observations are made by the forest itself. Trees growing among these structures create natural sundials as their shadows move across ancient carved markers, while the seasonal changes in vegetation provide new ways of marking the annual cycles that were once tracked through sophisticated mathematical calculations. The art and architecture that grace these transforming cities take on new meanings as they become integrated into forest ecosystems. Carved facades that once depicted rulers and gods now provide attachment points for epiphytes and climbing vines, creating living tapestries that blend human artistic vision with natural creativity. Stone sculptures become foundations for gardens of air plants and mosses, while elaborate friezes provide nesting sites for birds and small mammals. The spiritual significance of these places doesn't diminish with their transformation, but rather takes on new dimensions as they become sacred to both human memory and natural process. The Maya descendants who continue to visit these sites often find that the integration of human achievement with natural beauty creates even more powerful spiritual experiences than the original urban environments provided. The forest that embraces these ancient buildings seems to whisper with the voices of ancestors while also singing with the vitality of ongoing life. As our gentle journey through this remarkable mystery draws toward its peaceful conclusion, let time carry you forward once more, flowing like the jade-colored waters of a cenote toward the present moment. where modern archaeologists and Maya descendants work together to uncover and preserve the wisdom of this extraordinary civilization. Picture yourself standing in one of those ancient cities we've been visiting, perhaps Tikal or Palenque. But now in our contemporary world, where the forest-embraced ruins have become windows into one of humanity's most sophisticated and beautiful cultures. The mystery of Maya transformation that we've been exploring together has revealed itself not as a story of collapse or failure, but as a profound example of human wisdom and adaptability. The environmental challenges that began with subtle changes in rainfall patterns, the social adaptations that included new approaches to construction and resource management, the cultural innovations that preserved essential knowledge while adapting to new circumstances. All of these represent the kinds of intelligent responses that have always characterized successful human societies facing changing conditions. The Maya people themselves never disappeared, never vanished into mystery, as popular imagination might suggest. Today, millions of Maya descendants continue to live throughout Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras, maintaining cultural traditions that stretch back thousands of years while adapting to contemporary circumstances with the same wisdom and resilience that enabled their ancestors to navigate the transformations of the 9th and 10th centuries. They speak Maya languages, practice traditional agriculture, maintain ceremonial calendar systems, and preserve knowledge about medicinal plants and ecological relationships that represent unbroken connections to the ancient past. The archaeological discoveries that continue to emerge from the forest-embraced cities provide increasingly sophisticated understanding of how Maya civilization achieved its remarkable balance between human needs and environmental sustainability. Each new inscription that's deciphered, each new building that's carefully excavated, each new piece of pottery or jade jewelry that's analyzed adds to our appreciation of Maya achievements in astronomy, mathematics, engineering, art, and social organization. The modern techniques used to study Maya sites, including satellite imagery that can detect ruins beneath forest canopy, ground-penetrating radar that reveals buried structures, and computer analysis that helps decipher complex inscriptions, are revealing that Maya civilization was even more extensive and sophisticated than previously imagined. Cities that were thought to be separate entities are proving to have been connected by elaborate networks of roads and waterways. Population estimates are being revised upward as new residential areas are discovered. Agricultural systems are proving to have been more complex and productive than anyone had imagined. Perhaps most importantly, the study of Maya environmental adaptations is providing crucial insights for our own time. When human societies around the world face environmental challenges that require the same kinds of wisdom, cooperation, and creative adaptation that characterized Maya responses to changing conditions 1,000 years ago. The water management techniques developed by Maya engineers, the agricultural practices that maintained soil fertility for centuries, the forest management systems that increased rather than decreased biodiversity. All of these offer models for sustainable living that remain relevant today. As you allow yourself to settle into the peaceful conclusion of our journey together, let the image of sunlight filtering through the forest canopy to illuminate ancient carvings remind you that human knowledge and achievement never truly disappear, but rather transform themselves into new forms that continue to serve and inspire future generations. The Maya understanding of time as cyclical rather than linear suggests that every ending contains the seeds of new beginning. Every transformation carries within it the potential for renewal and growth. The mystery we've explored together teaches us that civilizations, like forests, are living systems that must adapt and change to survive and thrive. The Maya response to environmental challenge demonstrates that such adaptation can be accomplished with wisdom and grace, preserving what is most valuable while releasing what is no longer sustainable, maintaining cultural continuity while embracing necessary change. Sleep now, knowing that you carry within yourself the same capacity for patience, wisdom, and adaptive intelligence that enabled Maya civilization to transform itself rather than simply disappear, to preserve its essential wisdom while adapting to new circumstances, to demonstrate that human societies can respond to challenge not with collapse, but with creative renewal. Let the gentle rhythm of change and adaptation, the patient flow of time like jade water through limestone channels, carry you into peaceful dreams where the voices of the ancient forest whisper their eternal message that all things change, all things endure, and all things find their way toward new forms of beauty and meaning in the endless, gentle dance of time.